Okay, hi guys, good to chat as always. I just want to do a quick roundup of the regions. If you don't mind, I'll just kick off with East Asia Pacific. Very interesting one. Our major assessment today for Southeast Asia is the transport strike in Thailand. It's representing about 80,000 trucks, about 20% of the vehicles under the Land Transport Federation of Thailand's auspice. It's going to start on the 1st of November with threats to increase if the government doesn't meet their demands. And it's all about subsidies on diesel. It suggests that the government isn't going to meet its demands and that it's probably not going to tolerate such an offer to disturb tourism. Obviously, Thailand, between the red shirt and yellow shirt demonstrations, between floods, between economic crises, between COVID-19, the last thing it needs is a very left field threat to disrupt the opening of it for tourism. It's very dependent on tourism. 13% of the service sector is, I beg your pardon, 13% of the GDP is a service sector, of which tourism is the major component. So it suggests that the LTFT, or the Land Transport Federation of Thailand leadership, is about to remember why they don't run the government, and the one that doesn't tolerate things like this. And again, I'd suggest there's a lot of political forces behind it. Of course, across the rest of Southeast Asia, it's predominantly being dominated by COVID-19 issues, with the exception of Indonesia, that of course can't help itself to have demonstrations. In central Jakarta, the Alliance of the People's Labour Movement organised protesters. And according to the authorities, which they always expand this figure, but almost 2,000 members of the security forces were deployed to monitor the protests, which is a classic piece of Indonesian PR gone exceptionally and exponentially wrong when there's only 1,000 anti-government protesters. There was also a demonstration to commemorate Youth Pledge Day in Makassar, that's a city on the southern end of Sulawesi. So there's a lot going across Southeast Asia. For those that want to, can just wait. Every once or twice a week, we issue our daily advisories on LinkedIn, or for those that have budget and influence, they can actually get a membership and get all of our production. I might just reach out now to, I'll leave the rest of East Asia Pacific, North Asia, Australasia Pacific's been fairly quiet today, so I might hand over to you, Uday, to just give me a quick overview of South Asia.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so in South Asia, in Bangladesh, there was some political violence. 2 people were killed and about 30 people were injured in election-related clashes about 80 kilometers from Dhaka. Now, these kind of incidents are quite frequent in Bangladesh, and they just go to show how the security situation can devolve considerably in an area. But the big news coming out of South Asia, though, is in Pakistan. Tensions between the government and the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan has resulted in unrest in the country, mainly concentrated in Punjab province. It started last week with violence in Lahore, and this week at least 4 police officers have been killed and over 260 people have been injured in the clashes. So the TLP is currently trying to undertake a long march to Islamabad after a breakdown of negotiations with the government earlier this week. And authorities have blocked various points of the route between Lahore and Rawalpindi, Islamabad. They've set up containers, barricades, and deployed paramilitary forces. In the past, TLP's actions have paralyzed the country for weeks, so it's a really volatile situation at the moment and something to look out for.
Thanks, Uday. Basil, unless anyone has any questions of Uday or myself, why don't you crack on with Europe, Middle East and Asia, just a major issue or two, leave maybe Bhargav to carry off on Europe.
So Basil, before you start Middle East, I do have a quick question for Uday, especially with businesses who look at Pakistan as a growing economy. Do they need to be concerned about the growing influence of the Islamist parties such as TLP? They seem to wield a lot of influence, or if they do not have influence within the power corridor, they seem to have a lot of mass appeal. Is that a concern, you would say?
Oh, definitely, Bhargav. like as you said, the TLP has mass appeal. They can disrupt the country. They have paralyzed it before. And the issue that the TLP is protesting on is currently related to the French president's comments earlier this year on freedom of expression concerning caricatures of the Prophet. And what's interesting is that France is seeking to increase its investments in Pakistan. So the government, on one hand, is signing deals with them and trying to get more French investment, but at the same time, you see this kind of violence and unrest against them. So it's a tense situation, I think, and I think businesses should be concerned about this.
Thank you. Over to you, Basil.
Thank you, Bhargav. So today, this week, the spotlight was on Sudan. Sudan had a military coup, the third military coup in Africa after Mali and Guinea this year. The military coup seized power from the civilian and military sovereign council. At the same time, the military arrested the prime minister, Abdullah al-Hamdouk, and arrested several ministers of the government. They suspended air flights from Sudan until October 30, tomorrow. At the same time, violent protests had been recurring in Sudan over the week between protesters, between pro-democracy supporters and the military. This resulted in around 12 people being killed and over 100 being injured. At the same time, several international stances reflected on what's happening in Sudan. The World Bank suspended around $2 billion in aid for the country. At the same time, the US suspended around $700 million to aid Sudan's democratic transition into a civilian-led government. At the same time, we can see today that also some private companies like Western Union have suspended its services in the country until the military coup gives the power to civilian-led government. At the same time, we have another development in South Africa regarding the municipal elections. The president have announced actually the deployment of around 10,000 soldiers at voting stations and also at results stations. This announcement will have the government pay around $3.1 million. That is it in the MENA region. Over to you, Bhargav.
Thank you, Basil. So in Europe, the Brexit tension seems to be heating up. A British fishing trawler was arrested earlier yesterday, and they was arrested because of fishing or operating in territorial waters of France without a license. The arrest was done near the northern port of Le Havre. Brexit itself was a very tense moment in the UK, and now that the British fishermen are feeling the brunt of European disdain for British movement to exit from the European Union, and this is likely to get worse even further. And the British as well as European leadership need to recognize this before the tensions hurt the business community entirely. Now it is a fishing trawler, tomorrow it will be the supply lines, and day after it could be the investments across the borders. On another issue within the UK, the environmental activists, they do not seem to let up on their passion for environment at all. Apparently, they have vandalized Fawley oil refinery in Hampshire region, close to London. If they go further in vandalizing and disrupting major businesses, especially as crucial as oil refineries when entire Europe is facing energy crisis, it doesn't really look good for developed economies such as the UK, especially when after Brexit, they are looking for more investments in the industrial sector now that they have lost European labor as well as investments. Well, that's it from my end in Europe. Any comments or inputs?
Yes, mate. Only obviously we're covering now Europe plus the UK, are we? I loved your accent too, British. Very good. Is that because of your accent, or you were pulling the P? Now, mate, a couple of issues though I forgot to mention is Myanmar, and of course we have to remember that these figures are somewhat slanted because pretty much information coming out of Myanmar is either our own guy that has very limited visibility, or NGOs, or the PDF on using internet behind VPNs. So around 65 military Tatmadaw soldiers were allegedly killed during clashes with local resistance groups near the town of Korlan in the Sayang region between yesterday and back to October 27, so just in the last couple of days now. At least 25 Tatmadaw soldiers were allegedly killed during clashes with the Korlan's People's Defence Force near Falay village in Korlan. And at least 3 of the members were also killed during the clashes were PDF. We're getting a lot of information that some of the armed militant groups are actually making fairly large attacks against the Tatmadaw soldiers now. So even if these are exaggerated, there seems to be quite a bit of fire underneath the smoke. Another issue that's well worth monitoring for our clients, particularly with operations in Australia, is an ongoing corruption probe against the recently resigned New South Wales Premier, who's having troubles in the hearing understanding that having dated a member for Wagga Wagga, which is in the southwest of the state, that she should have had to declare that relationship when making multi-million-dollar decisions to award gun clubs state funding and other donations relevant. Now, even if corruption or nepotism wasn't involved, the fact that a premier of a state can sit in front of a hearing and either fail to hear or fail to understand and think it's acceptable to give wishy-washy answers, even when there's recordings of telephone calls that make it clear she knew something was a moot wash and just wanted to basically get told everything's okay, is of great concern. And that the fact that this repeatedly occurs, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland, basically states that are powerful people in it for the right reasons. And how can so many people in such senior levels have such poor judgment? So look, I think that's it for today, guys, unless anyone's got anything else to raise.
So Paul, that's it from us. Thank you very much.
Cheerio.